It's funny that I was asked to speak at this Afterdark, which I'm super honored to kick this off, by the way. But it's funny that I was asked to speak at the first one of the year, particularly the first one of fall semester, because historically speaking, I'm like really bad at this time of year. I had like a spectacularly difficult time transitioning to college. And even after that, even after I had made my friends and was confident in my life here, I never quite mastered the art of the graceful transition back to college. For instance, communion was just a few days ago for you new students, returning students. I'm sure you remember your communion service that like Biola intentionally designs to make you cry. It's really beautiful. And I remember communion, it was, 6 years for me now, this month. You know how you're supposed to, Dr. Corey's like, say goodbye to your family. So after communion, I walked with my parents and my little sister, who had moved me in, back to their rental car, which was parked in front of Alpha, which was the dorm that I lived in that year. And instead of like hugging them outside of the car, I got in the car with them, and we're sitting there, and my parents are like, wait, what? I'm like, just trying to make small talk and delay the inevitable, when finally my sweet, sweet dad goes, Sarah, get out of the car. I love you, get out of the car. So if that gives you a snapshot of how I handle this time of year. And even I remember sophomore year, at the end of sophomore year, when my friends and I were registering for housing, which is the most stressful thing in the entire world, and realizing that we weren't gonna live on the same floor next year. We weren't even gonna live in the same dorm. And I can remember like breaking down about that and being like, but what if we never see each other and everything's changing? And what if we're not even friends after this? And so I have a really difficult time with change, all things new or different. And so the timing of this chapel got me thinking about that time in my life, not only my transition as a new student, but all of the subsequent Augusts that I returned to this place, and how each year was so wildly different from the one that came before it. I started thinking about how this is the place where I met the friends who have become my family, some of whom are here in the front row tonight. The friends who have become my family, how it's the place where I made some of my best memories, had some of the best times of my life, and also some of the very worst. I got to thinking about how much I've changed since I was 18 and crying in my parents' rental car. The crying at goodbyes thing hasn't changed. That's probably a staple that's here to stay with me until I go home to Jesus. But how so much else about me and the way I see the world changed in those 4 years. And so I spent an afternoon last week where I dug out these boxes out of the back of my closet, these big black and white polka dot boxes where I keep keepsakes, like letters and journals and pictures. And I spent an afternoon just kind of sifting through snapshots of who I was and what I experienced in my time here at Biola. And so tonight, if it's okay with you, with your permission, I thought I might share some of the common themes that I came across in that process of reflection, things I realized or wished I would have done differently or had known during the chapter in my life marked college. So does that sound okay for you guys tonight? Yeah, we're good? Okay. And just for the record, I hope this doesn't come across as like me being like, I'm this wise sage with all of life's mysteries figured out, because that's definitely not what I'm trying to say. I'm just someone who happens to be stumbling down the road, emphasis on stumbling, just a breath ahead of you, trying to impersonate a grown-up, and apparently sometimes tricking people into giving me a microphone. So first, whether you are a new student or a returning student, in the community that you have or the one that you are going to find in the coming months, I hope that in your time here, you cultivate friendships where you are dedicated to telling each other the truth. The farther I venture out of college, the more grateful I become for my friends that I made here and the friendships that I have still, because my friends deeply understand that perhaps the most important thing we have to offer to each other is to consistently and when necessary, loudly remind each other of the truth of who we are. Because the lies come for all of us, don't they? those voices in your head or that gnawing in your stomach, the things you think about before you fall asleep at night that want you to believe that you're not worth anything, that you're broken somehow, that you're stupid or small or unlovable. There are plenty of people and messages out there that are competing for your attention, that want to define you. And so that's why it's so important to have people who aren't afraid to occasionally take your face between their hands, either literally or metaphorically, and look you dead in the eye and remind you who you are and how much you are worth loving, especially during times when you can't see it or believe it. You need people to remind you who you are, who you're becoming, and an important component of that means you need people who aren't afraid to call you on your crap. You need people who love you enough to speak when they know that what they have to say will be well received, and people who aren't afraid to speak when it's going to be difficult and awkward and probably won't be welcome. Now, this can get tricky. I'm not talking about cultivating a community where you police each other with spirits of legalism or operate out of shame or judgment. We all know people, or perhaps have been those people, who have called people out on their sin or their mistakes, but it's really more about contributing to that person's own sense of self-righteousness than it is anything else. Those kinds of call-outs, I think, don't really come from a place of love, but a place of arrogance. What I'm talking about is less of a calling out, but more of a calling up. You should have a few close people who you trust, who really know you and love you, who have permission to say, hey, I know who you really are and who you can be, and I love you too much to see whatever this is continue to play out in your life. You need people who love you enough that they aren't afraid of you temporarily being mad at them or placed in an uncomfortable position because they want you to be the best, fullest, and most healthy version of yourself. This kind of community doesn't produce this sense of walking around on eggshells, constantly afraid of messing up and being yelled at, but serves as a kind of safety net. And for me, this is comforting because I know that if and when, which has happened a lot and will continue to happen in the future, I start acting like an idiot, it won't be long before someone is like, hey, no. Someone sits me down and has a talk with me and helps me reorient myself before things get worse. Shauna Nyquist says this about friendship. True friendship is a sacred, important thing, and it happens when we drop down into that deeper level of who we are, when we cross over into the broken, fragile parts of ourselves. We have to give something up in order to get friendship like that. We have to give up our need to be perceived as perfect. We have to give up our ability to control what people think of us. We have to overcome the fear that when they see the depths of who we are, they'll leave. But what we give up is nothing in comparison to what this kind of friendship gives us. Friendship is about risk. Love is about risk. If we can control it and manage it and manufacture it, then it's something else. But if it's really love, really friendship, it's a little scary around the edges. I hope you find some friendships while you're here that are a little scary around the edges. Secondly, I hope that during your time here, you aren't afraid to doubt. I hope you're not afraid to question and to wrestle with God. Sometimes I'm afraid that we've become addicted to certainty. So addicted, in fact, that when doubts come, which is, by the way, a totally natural and normal part of human existence and of faith and of following Jesus, that we either bury our heads in the sand and pretend that they don't exist, or we allow them to just build up over time. We don't talk to anyone about them, of course not, because then we would be perceived as bad Christians. We implode and we just walk away from our faith entirely because we can't handle the weight of them all. You will have doubts and questions about your faith that you carry with you until God explains them to you himself on the other side of eternity. And that's okay. It doesn't mean you aren't a good Christian, that you aren't saved, or that you don't believe. It just means you have doubts. And I think that something we don't talk about enough is that there are some elements of our faith, of this beautiful thing that we call following Jesus, that are inherently mysterious. And I'm kind of convinced that we're not meant to understand. And there's beauty in that. That's okay too. You'll carry some doubts, and then in some seasons of your life, you'll feel like that period is just marked by doubt. You don't know which way is up, or if any of this is true. And those are really hard seasons, particularly if those times happen while you're here, because you're surrounded by this faith all the time, right? You can't avoid it. And I encourage you, when those times come, because they will, to wrestle, to question, to cry, to stretch, and to trust that if any of this is real, if any of it is true, if Jesus really is the way, the truth, and the life, he'll meet you right there. He'll roll up his sleeves and wrestle right along with you. In fact, I believe he'll do some of his best work in you in that place. He'll expand your vision and enlarge your heart and deepen your trust. So don't run away from those times. Hopefully in your education here, you're being given the skills to think critically, so don't be afraid to use them. And know that God isn't mad at you or disappointed in you for having questions. Author Jonathan Martin, in writing about Jesus after the resurrection, before he appeared to the disciples, but they had heard rumors that Jesus had perhaps resurrected, he says this about his interaction with Thomas. Thomas famously was the last holdout. You know this if you went to Sunday school, because history has unfairly labeled him Doubting Thomas, as if this one moment of his life summed up his entire character. Thomas was surely known to his friends for many other things. He may have been the disciple who always brought the coleslaw, old coleslaw Thomas, to the other guys. The disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord," but Thomas wanted to see for himself. It seemed too good to be true. So he said, "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands and put my finger in the mark of the nails of his hands and my hand in his side, I will not believe." Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Do not doubt, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus wasn't angry at Thomas. When Thomas so desperately needed to feel the wounds, Jesus offered his body to Thomas's probing, intrusive touch. If in order to believe he needed to touch Jesus in the places where he was hurt, then okay. Jesus is extraordinarily tender to doubters. My doubts do not sum me up any more than they did Thomas. And my doubts are no reason for me to not follow Jesus. I follow Jesus not because I don't have any doubts. I follow Jesus because in my doubt, he has always been tender with me. And when I've needed it badly enough, he has always given me a body to touch. Now next, and I'm going to need some group participation on this one, so if you can help me out, I'd really appreciate it. Okay, I'm going to need you to repeat after me. Ring by spring, is an expression, not a requirement. Okay. And let's pray. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so let me tell you a story. My senior year, I lived in a house with 7 girls. 5 of us were seniors, and we were graduating that spring. And throughout college, we had dated here and there, but by the time senior year rolled around, all but one of us were single. Now, none of us came to college to find a husband. Let that be known, okay? Not that we were opposed to it, but it's just not, it didn't happen for us. It wasn't our experience, and it certainly wasn't on our to-do list. But despite all of this, all of us had this moment in our final year, an alarm going off in our heads where we were all oh my gosh, it's almost over. Was this our chance? You're laughing, but you know you've thought about it. You have absolutely thought about it, returning students. If this was our window, it's closing rapidly. And so if this was our one shot, we blew it. Now, these moments of panic eventually passed. We knew those thoughts were ridiculous. And honestly, I'm like even embarrassed to say those things out loud. But all of us like brought them up to each other like, hey, have you maybe had this crazy thought? And all of us were like, oh my gosh, me too. We all had these moments independently. We were embarrassed that they'd even crossed our minds. That wasn't the reason we pulled all-nighters, writing papers, worked tirelessly at student jobs, or poured ourselves into campus ministries. We came to Biola to study God's word and be transformed into the likeness of Christ so that we might better further the kingdom. But despite the fact that our college careers were a success in almost every other way, there was something in our subconscious that suggested otherwise because of so many years of hearing people talk about Ring by Spring. Because if you hear something enough times, even if it's jokes, you're going to internalize it. Even if you don't think about it, even if you don't believe in it, even if it's not one of your goals, the words that we use and the language that we use matter. And they resulted in our 22-year-old selves being very concerned. Now, okay, if you happen to be engaged by the spring of your senior year, mazel tov. Like, congratulations. And like, I mean that. Like, some of my best friends got married right out of Biola, and it was good and beautiful and right. But I think it's important that we all understand, all of us here tonight, we understand that that will not be the story for the vast majority of you. Nor should it be the story for the vast majority of you. And I mean that, like, fully believing that you're wonderful, capable people. But, like, 22 is young. Like, calm down. Because whoever you are, whether you are in a relationship or not, you are a whole person. You are a whole person called to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, to embody the kingdom wherever you are and in whatever you do. And for too long, we've treated marriage as like this apex of the Christian life and human existence. It's an idol that we've made it an idol that like all of us must bow down to and arrange our lives around. And it's time to dethrone it, just like a little bit. And know that while marriage can be a very good, beautiful part of our lives and certainly our faith, it's not the goal. It's not bad to want a relationship or to want to be married, but your first call is always, always to discipleship. Always. It's funny, after one of these Afterdarks, I don't remember which one it was, I had a girl come up to me afterwards, and in a very like kind way, like not in like a mean way, ask me, are you ever worried that you're never going to have a boyfriend because of the things you say in chapel? I was kind of like, in my head, I was like, first of all, you don't know that I'm not in a relationship. Like I'm not, but like it. Like, can you smell it on me or something? Like, I don't understand. There's like a mark on my forehead. And afterward, or I took a moment, and I finally responded, like not as afraid as I am of being with someone who requires me to be like a smaller version of myself to be in that relationship. But that's another story for another time. My friend Emily Maynard, who came last year and spoke at Afterdark and also did a Ring by Spring event a couple years ago, writing on singleness, says this: I don't feel like half a person because I'm single. I only feel like that when my society, my church, or groups of people who cannot see beyond their own coupled lives push that half-hearted position on me. And more than people asking me why I'm not married, I'm tired of the assumption that I'm not a whole person. I'm tired of people saying, oh, it will happen to you someday, and you will meet your other half and you'll understand. I don't believe in magical solutions to anything or from anyone. Not even God. Not even Jesus shows up to fix everything about my life. He sent me the odd, mysterious, whispering Spirit. I have to do the so much work of listening to the Spirit. I have to practice at it. That Spirit invites me into my life, this wild, mysterious wonder, where things grow out of other things breaking down into dirt. This is your life. Stop waiting to live it until things are all under your control. Want, but do not stop wanting for 10,000 other good things besides a good marriage. This is your whole life. And lastly, my hope for you this year and every year here at Biola, but also and throughout the rest of your life, is that you find yourself overwhelmed by the knowledge of how very much God is for you. That the reality of God's wild, unending, reckless love for you is something you never move past. That the love of God would be the thing that wrecks you again and again and again. That you never treat it like some elementary lesson of faith that you can somehow move beyond, but that your view of your belovedness is constantly being expanded and stretched and reworked. May you never think that because you're minoring in Bible, that you're somehow capable of putting this on the list of things you understand. You're like, oh yeah, that's like Christianity 101. That's like PhD level Christianity. That's something you will spend your whole life trying to wrap your mind around. The second you think you understand it is the moment that you understand it the very least. In Ephesians 3, Paul writes, I pray that from his glorious, unlimited resources, he will empower you with inner strength through his Spirit. Then Christ will make his home in your hearts as you trust him. Your roots will grow down into God's love and keep you strong. And may you have the power to understand, as all God's people should, how wide, how long, how high, and how deep his love is. May you experience the love of Christ, though it is too great to understand fully. Then you will be made complete with all the fullness of life and power that comes from God. May you experience the love of Christ, though it is too great to understand fully. This year, if you fail a class, you are loved. If you get into grad school, you are loved. If your parents get a divorce, you are loved. If you have no idea what you're doing with your life and don't know if you ever will, you are loved. When you doubt, when you question, when you are afraid, when you feel close to God, when you don't feel close to God, you are loved. If everything goes right, if you're absolutely sure that you're supposed to be here and you're loving every minute of it, or if you wonder if you belong or if anyone even cares, you are loved. If all of your plans fall apart, or darkness feels like it's going to swallow you whole, you are loved. If you feel like the biggest screw up in the world, if you get your heart broken, if you find yourself lonely or tired or burnt out, you are loved. To paraphrase the late Brennan Manning, the God of Jesus loves you beyond fidelity and infidelity, beyond worthiness and unworthiness. In the morning sun and the evening rain, when your intellect denies it, your emotions refuse it, and your whole being rejects it. You are loved in this moment without condition or reservation, just as you are and not as you should be. In John's gospel, when Jesus is talking with his disciples, he says, as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. I want you to think about that for a second. Jesus, like the Jesus, right? There, the word that was at the beginning was there at the foundation of the world, the inventor of language, is like, oh, how can I put this? How can I describe my love for you? Oh, okay, here, guys, I've got it. So you know how much God loves me, Jesus, his one and only perfect and blameless Son, with whom he's been in perfect union with from eternity past. That love? Yeah, that pretty much captures how much I love you guys. You are loved with the same intensity, consistency, and depth with which the Father loves his one and only Son. As Sarah Bessey writes, love has happened and it is happening and it will happen. It is kind and patient towards you. You're already so loved. You aren't earning a breath of love or tenderness more than what you already have just by breathing, just by existing, just by being here in the wonder. Your name is already written in the lines of the hands of the universe. You're a star breath of dust and you are beloved intimately, faithfully, holy. It's your lifelong rock. You are known. You are loved with delight and abundance, with choice and desire, with covenantal love. And watch now, the places of weakness will become places of strength. Your desert will bloom with flowers. The well will never run dry. Everything will be redeemed. You are so loved. I trust that you'll handle this transition into this new year much better than I ever did. But if you don't, that's okay too. Come find me. I'll buy you a cup of coffee. We can cry about how scary being an adult is. My friends in the front row are like, that's not actually a joke at all. But however you handle transition, however you're feeling going into this new year, find your people. Find them and lean into them. May you have the grace and space to wrestle with whatever questions come your way this year. And may you trust that your story is unfolding just as it should, and that our good and gracious God is ever with and particularly for you.
We hope you enjoyed this message. Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Learn more at biola.edu.